She rose from the water, thinking she was alone. Then froze, seeing the cowboy watching. Maria had always felt a strange pull toward the river at the edge of her town. Breaths. It wasn't a large river, not by any means. It curved gently through the outskirts, lined with trees that swayed softly, even in the lightest breeze. The water was never too deep, never too wide, and it shimmered in the late afternoon sunlight like silver threads stretching over smooth stones. But for Maria, it was more than just a river. It was a place where she could breathe freely, where the burdens of her life seemed to float away with the current. She had discovered this river years ago, almost by accident. One day, during a particularly stressful week at work, she had needed to get away from everything: the office, the traffic, the constant noise of calls and emails. It was all too much. Frowned. Bad. She had taken a long walk, letting her feet carry her wherever they wanted to go, and eventually she stumbled upon the river. At first, she had only stood at the bank, watching the sunlight dance on the water's surface, listening to the birds calling to each other in the trees. But soon, she had felt an irresistible urge to step in, to let the cool water touch her skin. It had been a relief, almost like stepping out of a cage into a world that made sense. But from that day on, the river had become her quiet escape, her secret sanctuary. This evening was no different. Maria had spent the entire day running errands and attending meetings. Her head felt heavy with thoughts she couldn't untangle, and her chest ached with an invisible weight. Something inside her whispered that she needed the river tonight, that she needed its quiet, its stillness. She slipped on a simple dress, the one she didn't mind getting wet, and walked toward the edge of town. The streets were familiar, yet she barely noticed them. Her mind was elsewhere, preoccupied with the river waiting ahead, with the sense of release it promised. When she reached the riverbank, the air smelled of wet earth and wildflowers. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, the kind of colors that seemed almost unreal, as if the world had paused for a moment just for her. Maria took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders loosen slightly. She removed her sandals and let the grass tickle her bare feet. Step by step, she walked into the water, feeling the coolness embrace her ankles, then her knees. Each step seemed to take her further from her worries, further from the world she had left behind. When she was finally submerged up to her waist, Maria paused. The water lapped gently against her skin, and she closed her eyes, letting herself float for a moment. Shh, 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 shh. And she closed her eyes, letting herself float for a moment. She could hear only the river, the wind in the trees, and the occasional distant call of a bird returning to its nest. Bah! It was perfect. She lifted her head, letting her hair cling to her face and shoulders, and took another deep breath. The water held her gently, supporting her weight, and for the first time that day, she felt truly free. Maria had always loved these moments of solitude. She loved the way the water made her feel small in the grandness of the world, yet strangely significant because she could feel so completely alive. She let herself drift, her movements slow and lazy, as if time itself had decided to pause for her. Thoughts she had been carrying for days, worries about work, family, and obligations began to slip away. She focused only on the sensation of water moving around her, the soft ripples spreading out with every small motion of her arms. As she floated, Maria thought about how rare it was to have a place like this, a sanctuary where she could be completely herself. Bah. She thought about the other times she had come here, the hours spent walking along the riverbank, writing in her journal, or simply staring at the sky.
Every visit had been a balm to her restless mind, but tonight felt different.
Tonight she felt a deeper need to let go, to shed the weight she had carried for far too long. She sank a little deeper into the water, letting the current brush against her, and imagined herself drifting away from all the expectations and pressures of life. The river was quiet, almost eerily so. The usual rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush, the soft splash of a fish breaking the surface, the occasional bird call. All of it seemed muted, as if the world had decided to keep its distance. Maria liked it that way. She liked feeling that she had the river all to herself, that she could vanish into its calm without anyone noticing. She let herself close her eyes again, floating on her back, arms stretched out, feeling like she was suspended between water and sky. She thought about how strange it was to feel so alone, yet not lonely. Alone, yes, in the physical sense. There was no one else here with her, but not lonely, because the river filled that space. It spoke to her in a language she didn't need words for. The gentle push of the current, the way the water curved around her body, the soft ripple of waves against the rocks, all of it felt like a conversation, a reminder that she was part of something bigger than herself. Buddy allowed herself a small smile, her eyes still closed, soaking in the peace that had been so rare in her life. Maria stayed like that for what felt like hours, even though it was probably only minutes. She floated, turned and moved slowly through the water, letting the rhythm of the river guide her. Every small movement brought a strange clarity, a sense of focus that had eluded her for days. She thought about the weeks she had endured, the stress of deadlines, the endless calls and messages, the arguments and misunderstandings. And for the first time, she realized that none of it mattered here.
Not really. Here, in the water, she could just be Maria.
Not an employee, not a daughter, not a friend. Just Maria. Eventually, she drifted closer to the shallow edge, letting her feet touch the soft, muddy bottom. She opened her eyes, blinking against the sunlight fading in the sky, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. This river, this quiet, this moment, it was hers alone. She could take it with her, tuck it into her memory, and carry it into the world that waited beyond the trees. Shh. She sighed, a long, slow release, feeling the tension drain from her shoulders completely. Maria thought she was completely alone. Narration. She believed the river was hers, that this evening belonged only to her. She didn't see anyone on the banks. Drowned in despair, she didn't hear voices or footsteps. For a while, she allowed herself to fully sink into the illusion that the world beyond the water did not exist. She floated, closed her eyes, and let herself drift in the simple, perfect freedom of being alone. But the river, she would soon discover, had other plans for her solitude. Maria had been floating in the river for what felt like a long time, completely absorbed in the quiet around her. The gentle current rocked her slowly, and she let her mind wander, thinking of everything and nothing at once. The water had a strange, calming effect, as if it could absorb her worries and carry them far away. For a moment she forgot about the office, the traffic, the endless responsibilities that waited for her beyond the trees. She thought she was completely alone. But as she slowly lifted her head from the water to take a deep breath, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. On the riverbank, partially hidden behind a cluster of tall grass and a leaning tree, there was a figure. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow created by the late sun slipping toward the horizon. But as she focused, the figure became clearer. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. His boots were dusty, and he leaned casually against the tree, arms crossed, watching her. Maria froze. Her mind raced with a sudden mix of fear and confusion. How long had he been there? Was he dangerous? Did he mean to hurt her? Her heart pounded, and the calm she had felt moments ago evaporated like mist in the sunlight. The river, once a comforting cocoon, suddenly felt like a place where anything could happen. She wanted to call out, to demand to know who he was, but her voice caught in her throat. She tried to stay calm. Maria told herself to breathe, to think clearly. Maybe he had been walking along the river and had simply stopped to rest. Maybe he hadn't even noticed her until she moved. Still, the feeling of being watched so directly and deliberately sent a shiver down her spine. She lowered herself slightly deeper into the water, hoping to make herself less visible. But the man didn't move. He continued to watch her quietly, almost patiently, as if he were waiting for something. Maria's mind was spinning. She thought about what she should do next. Should she swim to the other side of the river? Should she get out immediately and confront him? Voracious. Or should she stay put, hoping that he would eventually leave? Every option seemed risky. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and entirely aware of the thin barrier between safety and danger. Her hands trembled slightly as they skimmed the water around her. Barash. Then she noticed something else. Despite the initial fear, there was something in his posture that didn't scream threat. His body was relaxed, not tense. He didn't have his hands raised or make sudden movements. He wasn't shouting, nor was he pointing or gesturing. There was a quietness about him, a stillness that made it clear he wasn't there to harm her. Maria's heart rate slowed just a little as she realized that maybe this man wasn't dangerous, but rather something else entirely, someone who had simply appeared in her quiet world, uninvited, but not aggressive. She decided to speak, to break the tension, even though her voice was tentative. "Hello?" she called softly, the sound barely rising above the gentle lapping of the water. The man didn't respond immediately. He tilted his head slightly, still watching her with calm eyes that seemed to measure her, not judge her. Maria swallowed nervously, wishing she could see his face more clearly, but the brim of his hat cast a shadow that made it impossible. After a few moments, he spoke in a low, steady voice. "Evening," he said simply. "The river's quiet tonight." His words were simple, almost mundane, but the calmness in his tone was disarming. Maria felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. Relief because he hadn't said anything threatening. Curiosity because he had appeared so suddenly, so quietly. She noticed the faint lines on his face, the way his eyes seemed thoughtful, as if he had been lost in his own world before noticing her. There was an air of familiarity in his stance, like someone who had spent years in places like this and knew them intimately. Maria swam a little closer to the shallow edge, careful not to move too quickly, and called back. "Yes, it is. Very quiet." Her voice was steadier now, though she could still feel a flutter of anxiety in her chest. She didn't know why she was talking to a stranger in the river, but something inside her urged her to respond, to make some kind of connection instead of leaving the moment hanging with tension. The man nodded, and a small smile appeared beneath the shadow of his hat. "I come here often," he said. "Helps me think." Maria felt a flicker of recognition. She understood that need all too well, the need to escape from the world, even for a short while, to let thoughts and worries settle in the quiet. "Me too," she admitted. I come here to get away." "It's the only place I feel calm sometimes." The man shifted slightly, leaning more against the tree, still keeping a respectful distance. "I get that," he said. "It's easy to forget the noise of life when you're out here." "The river has a way of reminding you of the simple things." Maria nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. She floated a little closer to the bank, her legs moving slowly through the water. She kept her arms stretched to maintain balance, but she no longer felt as tense. His presence, while surprising, didn't feel threatening anymore. Instead, there was an odd sense of companionship, the kind that doesn't need words, a silent acknowledgement that they were both alone here, yet together in the quiet moment. She tried to remember everything about him without staring. His hat, the worn boots, the way the sunlight caught the edges of his clothing, the calm and patient manner in which he watched her. It was unusual to feel such comfort from a stranger, and Maria couldn't quite explain it. Yet the river, which had always been a place of solitude for her, suddenly felt slightly fuller, as if it had room for another presence, one that might even understand her in ways that others never could. Time seemed to slow. The sun continued its descent, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, and the river reflected those colors like liquid glass. The man didn't speak again immediately, allowing the silence to stretch comfortably between them. Maria felt the tension in her body melt further, replaced by a cautious curiosity. Who was he? Why was he here? She didn't ask, though. Somehow, the question seemed unnecessary. The moment itself was enough. Then, almost instinctively, Maria decided to test the waters, literally and figuratively. She moved closer to the shallow area near the bank, letting her hands skim the smooth stones beneath the water. The man didn't move, but his presence felt grounding, as if he were offering a silent reassurance that she wasn't in danger. She began to feel more like herself, more like the Maria who had first discovered the river years ago. Curious, thoughtful, and at peace, even if only temporarily. Finally, she took a deep breath and allowed herself to relax completely, floating back on her back and looking up at the sky. The clouds were thin, tinged with pink, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. She felt a strange sense of gratitude, not just for the river, but for the unexpected presence of this stranger, who seemed to have appeared at precisely the moment she needed a reminder that solitude and connection could coexist. Maria had come to the river expecting complete isolation, but life had a way of surprising her. She realized that even in moments meant for herself, unexpected encounters could bring insights, emotions, and connections she hadn't anticipated. Her heartbeat gradually returned to normal, the fear melting into a cautious calm. She stayed in the water, watching the man on the bank, and felt a subtle shift within herself. Maybe it was trust, or maybe it was simply the recognition of another human being who understood the quiet and the solace that the river provided.
As the sun dipped lower, the river darkened slightly, the colors deepening and reflecting in the water with a soft, muted glow.
Maria remained in the water, floating and observing, her senses alert yet relaxed. She couldn't predict what would happen next, but she felt ready to meet it. The tension of fear had been replaced by a fragile curiosity, and she realized that this evening, which had begun as a solitary escape, might become a memory she would carry for a long time.
A story of being watched, yet not threatened, of encountering a stranger,
yet feeling a connection, however brief. Maria didn't yet know who this man was, nor why he had appeared at this quiet riverbank. But she knew that the world could surprise her in unexpected ways, sometimes bringing comfort when she least expected it. For now, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, floating in the river, and letting the sunset wash over her. And even though she didn't say a word, she felt a silent acknowledgement pass between her and the man, an unspoken understanding that sometimes the right person appears at the right time, even if only for a fleeting instant. As the sun continued to sink toward the horizon, Maria floated quietly in the river, feeling the water gently rocking her back and forth. The world around her had grown softer. The trees swayed lazily in the evening breeze. Birds called to one another in low tones, and the river itself seemed to reflect the fading light like a mirror of gold and pink. For a while, everything felt peaceful, even comforting. But deep inside, Maria could feel a stirring of unease. She didn't know why, but the calmness of the river seemed too perfect, almost fragile. Her eyes shifted toward the man on the bank. He hadn't moved, hadn't taken a single step closer or farther away. He stood as still as the trees themselves, leaning lightly against the rough bark of an old oak. Maria studied him carefully. His face remained mostly in shadow under the wide brim of his hat, but she could see the lines at the edges of his eyes, faint and worn from years of sun and work. Something about him seemed steady and grounded, yet there was an air of mystery that she couldn't quite place. She wondered how long he had been watching her. For a moment, Maria felt a twinge of fear again. What if he had been there the entire time she was in the river, waiting for her? Her heart rate quickened, and her breath caught in her throat. She reminded herself to stay calm, to think clearly. The river had always been her place of safety, her quiet escape. Barash, she didn't want to let fear ruin it. She took a slow, deep breath, letting the water support her as she floated on her back, staring at the sky above. But the unease didn't disappear. It grew slowly, like a shadow creeping across her mind. She realized that she felt exposed, not because the man seemed threatening, but because she was alone in the water, in a place meant for solitude, and someone else had unexpectedly entered that private world. The sense of vulnerability prickled at her skin, and she realized how fragile her peace really was. She had believed she was alone, and that belief had given her comfort. Now, with him watching, everything felt different. Maria's instincts told her to move closer to the shore, to reduce the distance between herself and safety. She kicked her legs slowly, propelling herself toward the shallow edge where the water met the soft mud. The man didn't react immediately. He remained where he was, silent, calm, almost as if he were allowing her to make the first move. She felt a strange mixture of relief and curiosity. Relief because he hadn't acted aggressively, and curiosity because she wanted to understand why he was here at all. When she reached the shallower water, Maria pushed herself upright, letting the current drift past her as she stood. The water came only to her waist now, and she could feel the stones beneath her feet. She kept her gaze on the man, trying to read him, hoping for some clue about his intentions. He nodded once, a simple gesture, and spoke softly. The river can be quiet, but sometimes it tells more than you realize. Maria tilted her head, puzzled. What do you mean? She asked, her voice steady but curious. Psst. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the water, tracing the gentle waves with his eyes. People come here to escape, he said finally, to forget, to breathe. But even rivers have a way of showing things we don't expect.
Things about ourselves. Maria considered his words.
There was something strange and almost poetic about them, a depth she hadn't anticipated. She had always thought of the river as a place of solitude, a sanctuary where she could leave the world behind. But perhaps it was also a place of reflection, of understanding, of confronting the unexpected. She shivered slightly, not from the cold water, but from the realization that this stranger, quietly standing on the bank, had somehow entered a moment meant only for her. A small smile flickered across her face, though it was mixed with nervousness. I guess. I didn't expect anyone else to be here, she admitted. I thought I was alone. The man nodded again, slowly. Sometimes we think we're alone, and then something or someone reminds us we're not. Not always in ways we expect. His voice was calm, measured, and oddly comforting. Maria found herself relaxing slightly, even though she didn't fully understand why. But then, something shifted. Maria noticed movement in the shadows behind him. A small rustling of leaves, the faint sound of something shifting in the underbrush. Her body tensed instinctively. Was there someone else there? Or was it an animal? She couldn't see clearly, and the uncertainty sent a jolt through her chest. She glanced at the man, expecting him to react, but he remained calm, almost unbothered. That steadiness reassured her slightly, though it also made her more curious. How could he be so composed when she felt her heart racing? Gathering her courage, Maria decided to step fully out of the water and onto the muddy bank. The river had been comforting, but now the world outside of it demanded her attention. She reached for a nearby tree branch for support and pulled herself carefully onto dry land, her mud squished beneath her feet. Cool and soft, a reminder that even in the wild there was grounding and stability. The man straightened slightly as she approached. His hat tilted, revealing just a hint of his face in the dimming light. Maria caught a glimpse of sharp, observant eyes that seemed to look right through her, not in a threatening way, but in a way that felt like he understood. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a flicker of trust forming. "I'm Maria," she said softly, unsure why she felt the need to introduce herself. "Jake," he replied. "I didn't mean to startle you." "Brace. I've just been out here a lot. Helps me think." Maria nodded. "I understand that. I come here for the same reason." There was a pause, a quiet moment where the river, the trees, and the fading light seemed to hold their breath. Maria realized that even though she had initially felt fear, she no longer felt threatened. Instead, there was a sense of shared understanding, an unspoken connection that didn't need words. Still, curiosity and caution mixed together in her chest. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Jake chuckled softly, a sound that was low and easy. "Long enough to see you floating and think, someone else might need the river tonight too." His tone was gentle, almost thoughtful. Maria blinked at him, surprised by the unexpected kindness in his words. The riverbank was quiet again, but Maria's mind was racing. She wondered how often she had assumed she was alone in the world, how often she had ignored the possibility that people, strangers, friends, or even fleeting acquaintances could appear in moments she thought were private. She thought about how fragile her solitude had been, how easily it could have been broken. Yet now, standing on the muddy bank, speaking quietly with this man, she felt a strange reassurance. They talked quietly for a few more minutes, sharing small observations about the river, the way the water smelled after rain, the way the trees bent in the wind, the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. It was simple, almost mundane, yet it felt meaningful. Maria realized that sometimes the smallest conversations carried the weight of understanding. Jake didn't press her with questions about her life, and she didn't ask about his. Yet in those few moments, there was a silent acknowledgement that each of them had struggles, and that the river had a way of making them feel lighter, even if just for a little while. Maria glanced back at the water and then at Jake. For the first time, she felt a flicker of curiosity about him. Not fear, not suspicion, but a genuine desire to know the person who had appeared so quietly in her evening. She noticed the way his shoulders were relaxed, the calm in his posture, and something in her chest warmed with the idea that not all encounters were meant to bring tension. Some were meant to bring insight, understanding, and unexpected companionship. The sun dipped lower, and the sky darkened into shades of purple and deep orange. The river reflected these colors, shimmering and moving gently with the current. Maria felt that the river had changed slightly. It was no longer just her sanctuary. It was a place where life, in all its unexpected ways, could reach her. And even though she had begun the evening expecting solitude, she now realized that solitude and human connection were not always opposites. Sometimes they could exist together, quietly, without disturbing the peace. Maria didn't know what would happen next, or whether she would see Jake again, but she felt a subtle shift inside her, a feeling of readiness, of resilience, of understanding that life could surprise her in ways she hadn't anticipated. And as she stood on the riverbank, looking at the man who had appeared silently from the shadows, she realized that even in moments meant for reflection, the unexpected could bring a quiet lesson. A small spark of connection that lingered long after the moment passed. The evening grew darker, and the river began to take on a deeper, almost mysterious hue as the last traces of sunlight faded behind the horizon. Maria and Jake still stood on the bank, close enough to see each other clearly yet far enough to maintain a respectful space. The air was cool now, carrying the subtle scent of wet earth and wildflowers. The gentle rustle of leaves overhead created a soft soundtrack to their quiet moment. For a while, neither of them spoke, and the silence was not awkward. It was a shared understanding, a pause that felt necessary. Maria's mind, however, was active, filled with thoughts she couldn't easily push aside. Breath. She thought about how fragile the calmness of the river had felt when she first noticed Jake, the fear she had felt earlier, the sudden shock of realizing someone had been watching her, had left a mark. It was a reminder that even in places meant for solitude, life had a way of introducing the unexpected. She realized that her comfort, her peace was not always guaranteed, and that even moments of quiet could carry uncertainty. She shivered slightly and wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the intensity of her own thoughts. She thought about how many times she had avoided risks in her life, how many moments she had let fear or caution prevent her from experiencing something new. And now, here she was, standing in the fading light, with a stranger, feeling a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something she couldn't quite name. A flicker of trust. Jake seemed to sense her hesitation. He tilted his hat back slightly, revealing more of his face in the dim light. His expression was calm, thoughtful, and steady. "You okay?" he asked gently, his voice carrying a quiet concern. Maria nodded, though her mind was still racing. "Yes, I just wasn't expecting anyone," she admitted. Her voice was soft, almost shy, but she felt a small relief in speaking aloud. Acknowledging her own vulnerability made her feel slightly stronger, as if putting words to her unease allowed her to face it more clearly. Breath. Jake nodded, as if he understood exactly what she meant. "It's easy to feel vulnerable when you're out here alone," he said. "Even if it's a place you love, there's always the reminder that the world can reach you when you least expect it." His words were simple, yet they carried a depth that made Maria pause. She realized he wasn't just talking about the river. He was talking about life itself, about the unpredictability of moments and people. They began to walk slowly along the riverbank, Maria keeping her feet in the wet mud, and Jake stepping carefully beside her. The water lapped gently at the edge, and the soft sound seemed to match the rhythm of their steps. Maria found herself talking more freely than she had expected. Breaths. She shared small stories about her life, her work, the stress she had felt lately, the little escapes she had taken to cope with the demands of the world. She spoke cautiously, aware that this man was still a stranger, yet something about his calm presence made it easier to open up. Jake listened attentively without interrupting or judging.
He shared small stories from his own life as well, not details that felt personal in a deep sense, but observations and experiences from his time working on the ranch and growing up near the river.
Maria found herself drawn in by his calm, steady way of speaking, the quiet wisdom in his words, and the way he seemed to notice things she hadn't, like the way the wind carried the scent of the river or the soft tremor of a fish jumping near the bank. As they walked, Maria began to feel a strange combination of relief and tension. The relief came from the simple fact that she was no longer completely alone. She had someone to share the moment with, someone who seemed to understand the river in a way she did. But the tension remained, a subtle undercurrent of uncertainty. She wondered what had brought him here, why he had been watching her, and whether she had been too open in speaking to him. Breaking. Questions and doubts mingled with curiosity and a growing sense of trust. Eventually, they reached a slightly wider part of the riverbank, where the trees created a natural enclosure, a small clearing with soft grass and scattered stones. Maria stepped onto the grass, feeling the cool blades beneath her feet. Jake remained a step behind, his gaze scanning the surroundings as if making sure the place was safe. Maria noticed that he was careful, deliberate, yet relaxed, an interesting combination that made her feel both reassured and intrigued. They sat down on a large, flat rock near the river's edge, the water flowing gently in front of them. Maria's legs dangled just above the surface, and she could feel the slight vibration of the current against the rock. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day begin to lift, but still aware of the lingering tension in her chest. The river had always been her sanctuary, but now it was a place where she was learning that peace could be shared, even cautiously. Jake spoke again, breaking the silence. "Sometimes," he said, "we come to places like this to escape, but what we really find is a reflection of ourselves. We see our fears, our hopes, even things we didn't realize were inside us." Maria considered his words. There was something deeply true in them. The river had allowed her to feel free, but it had also forced her to confront her own vulnerabilities, the fear of being watched, the fear of being exposed, the fear of unexpected encounters. Yet in that confrontation, she found insight. She realized that fear and understanding often existed together, that vulnerability could lead to strength, and that connection, even brief and unexpected, could be comforting. "I guess I never thought about it that way," she said softly. "I always saw the river as a place to run away, to forget everything. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a place to see what's really inside you." Jake nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Exactly. And sometimes, meeting someone else here, even someone you don't know, reminds you that you're not as alone as you think. That even when we're facing our own struggles, someone else might be walking a similar path." Maria felt a warmth spread through her chest. The fear she had felt earlier, the uncertainty, the vulnerability, all of it began to transform into understanding. She realized that her solitude had been valuable, but the unexpected presence of another person had added depth to the moment. It had shown her that even in places meant for escape, life could bring connections that mattered, connections that were gentle, quiet, and meaningful. As the evening deepened, the sounds of the river and the rustling trees became more pronounced. Maria and Jake continued their conversation, speaking about life, small joys, and the lessons learned from challenges. Maria found herself laughing softly at small anecdotes Jake shared, enjoying the simplicity of the moment. She realized that this connection, though brief and unexpected, was comforting in a way that solitude alone could not provide. The sky darkened further, stars beginning to appear above, twinkling faintly in the twilight. Maria looked up and felt a sense of awe, a reminder of the vastness of the world and the small yet significant role each person played in it. She thought about how quickly moments could pass, how easily opportunities for understanding and connection could slip away if not embraced. Finally, as the night settled in, Maria stood up and brushed off her dress. The water had cooled around her feet, and she could feel the damp earth beneath her soles. She turned to Jake and smiled, a smile that carried gratitude and acknowledgement. "Thank you," she said simply.
"Bruh. For everything tonight?" Jake tipped his hat slightly, returning the gesture with quiet respect.
"It was nothing," he replied, breaths. "Just a shared moment. But sometimes shared moments are enough." Maria nodded, feeling a deep sense of closure and understanding. The river, which had started as a place for escape, had transformed into a place of insight, connection, and reflection. She realized that life was unpredictable, that fear and vulnerability were natural, and that unexpected encounters could bring comfort and perspective if approached with openness. As she began to walk back toward the path leading to town, Maria felt lighter, as if the weight she had carried for days had been eased by the river, by the night, and by the quiet presence of someone who had appeared when she least expected it. She glanced back at the river, at the faint silhouette of Jake on the bank, and knew that this evening would remain with her. A memory of fear transformed into understanding, of solitude transformed into shared experience, and of the quiet lessons life sometimes offers when we least expect them. Maria walked slowly along the narrow path that led away from the river, the damp earth soft beneath her feet. The night had fully settled now, and the sky was dark but dotted with countless stars that twinkled like distant lanterns. The river behind her whispered softly, its gentle lapping against the bank carrying the memory of the evening. Maria felt a strange mix of calm and reflection, but she had come here expecting solitude, a simple escape from the burdens of her life. But instead she had experienced something entirely different, a quiet encounter that had shifted something inside her. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back to Jake. His presence had been unexpected, yet it had felt reassuring. The way he had listened, the calmness he carried, the quiet respect he had shown for her space, it all left a lasting impression. She realized that in life even brief interactions with strangers could leave deep impressions, teaching lessons she hadn't anticipated. She had begun the evening thinking she needed to be completely alone, but now she understood that solitude and connection could coexist. Even a brief connection could leave a mark, a reminder that the world was larger and more nuanced than she often allowed herself to see. The path curved gently through the woods, and the sounds of the river faded behind her, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. Maria breathed deeply, feeling the cool night air fill her lungs. The tension she had carried all day, the stress from work, the endless responsibilities, the unspoken anxieties, had eased. It hadn't disappeared entirely, of course. Life always carried its challenges. But the heaviness had lifted, replaced by clarity and a quiet sense of perspective. The river and the encounter she had experienced had given her a gift she hadn't expected, the gift of seeing life more fully, of understanding that even unexpected moments could carry meaning. As she continued walking, Maria thought about how small moments could change everything. The fear she had felt earlier, the sudden shock of noticing Jake watching her, had initially filled her with anxiety. But that fear had led to reflection, to conversation, and ultimately to understanding. She realized that moments of discomfort often carried the seeds of growth. Sometimes it was the very thing that startled or unsettled her, that opened her eyes to new perspectives, new possibilities, and even new connections. The memory of their conversation replayed in her mind. Jake's words about the river reflecting what was inside. Each person resonated deeply. She thought about how she had often come to the river to escape, to forget her worries, yet the river had not allowed her to forget completely. It had asked her to confront her thoughts, to acknowledge her vulnerabilities, and to see her own strength. The encounter with Jake had amplified that lesson, showing her that connection, even when unexpected, could enhance the insight she had gained from solitude. As Maria walked, she found herself smiling. It was a small, quiet smile, but it felt significant. She realized that gratitude had begun to take root inside her. Gratitude for the river, for the quiet, for the unexpected presence of someone who had appeared at just the right moment. Gratitude for the reminder that she was never truly alone. Even when life felt heavy or overwhelming, she thought about the simple human connection they had shared. No promises, no obligations, just understanding and respect. And how powerful that connection had been in its own way. The path eventually led her to the edge of town, where the streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement. Maria paused for a moment, taking in the familiar sights, the small shops closing for the night, the faint hum of distant traffic, the quiet homes lining the streets. The contrast between the bustling world she was returning to and the quiet refuge of the river made her reflect on the balance she needed in her own life.
She realized that she didn't need to escape completely to find peace.
She could carry the lessons of the river with her, using them as a guide for finding quiet moments, for slowing down, and for seeking understanding when life became overwhelming. Maria's mind wandered to thoughts about fear and trust. That initial shock, the moment when she had first realized someone was watching her, had felt like a violation of her private space. But she had learned that fear could coexist with trust, that caution could exist alongside openness, and that vulnerability didn't always lead to harm. Sometimes it led to understanding, to meaningful connection, and to self-discovery. She realized that she had underestimated the value of letting someone into a quiet moment, even briefly. That insight stayed with her, settling in her mind like a gentle reminder of life's complexities. As she reached her own front door, Maria paused again, looking back toward the darkness where the river lay beyond the trees. She could still hear the faint ripple of the water in her memory, and she could almost see the shadow of Jake standing on the bank, quiet and steady. She felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the river, the night, and the encounter had left her changed, even if subtly. The fear, the tension, the uncertainty, they had all passed, leaving room for clarity, reflection, and understanding. Stepping inside, Maria set down her bag and kicked off her shoes. The warmth of her home enveloped her, a comforting contrast to the cool night air outside. She moved slowly, savoring the quiet, the stillness, and the feeling of safety. Yet even in the comfort of her home, the memory of the river and the encounter lingered. It reminded her that life was full of unexpected moments, some startling, some gentle, but all capable of teaching lessons if she was open to them. She made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the night sky. The stars were bright above, mirrored faintly in the river's distant reflection. Maria thought about the evening in its entirety, the solitude she had sought, the calmness of the water, the sudden presence of a stranger, and the quiet conversation that had followed. But each moment had its own importance, each a thread woven into the experience that she would carry with her. She realized that life didn't always give clear answers or easy lessons, but it did offer opportunities for insight, growth, and connection. Maria reflected on herself, on her reactions, and on the courage it had taken to face the unexpected. She thought about how she had initially felt fear, yet had chosen to stay, to observe, and to engage. She realized that bravery was not always about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about remaining present, open, and thoughtful, even in the face of uncertainty. That quiet courage had allowed her to experience something meaningful, something that would remain with her long after the night ended. As the hours passed, Maria began to feel sleepy, yet her mind was calm, at peace with the day's events. She realized that the river had given her more than an escape. It had given her insight into herself, into the nature of connection, and into the balance between solitude and companionship. The encounter with Jake, brief as it had been, had highlighted the importance of being open to life's surprises and of finding meaning in moments that initially seemed ordinary. Before going to bed, Maria wrote a few lines in her journal, a habit she often used to capture thoughts and reflections. She wrote about the river, the solitude, the sudden appearance of Jake, and the lessons she had learned from the quiet conversation. She wrote about fear, trust, and the delicate balance between them. And she wrote about gratitude, for the river, for the encounter, and for the reminder that life, even in its unpredictability, could offer moments of clarity and connection if she was willing to see them. Finally, Maria lay down to sleep, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in days. The worries of the world remained, as they always would, but they no longer weighed on her as heavily. She understood now that moments of reflection, solitude, and connection could provide strength and perspective, even in the midst of life's challenges. She closed her eyes, carrying with her the memory of the river, the calm presence of Jake, and the quiet lessons of the evening. In the days and weeks that followed, Maria returned to her routine, to work, and to life's responsibilities. Yet she carried the experience with her. The memory of the river and the encounter reminded her to pause, to breathe, and to notice the quiet moments. It reminded her that even when life felt overwhelming, she could find spaces of peace and clarity. And it reminded her that connection, brief, unexpected, and gentle, could bring insight and comfort in ways she hadn't imagined. Even though she never knew if she would see Jake again, Maria didn't dwell on it. The encounter was enough. The lesson was enough. The memory of the quiet river, the twilight, and the brief, unspoken understanding between two strangers stayed with her. A reminder that life, with all its surprises and uncertainties, could offer moments of beauty, reflection, and growth. If only one was willing to be present, open, and attentive. And so, Maria continued her life with a renewed sense of awareness. She sought balance between work and rest, solitude and companionship. She carried gratitude for the small things, understanding that even ordinary moments could hold extraordinary meaning. And every so often, when the weight of the world pressed too heavily, she would remember the river, the evening sky, the calm presence of a stranger, and the gentle reminder that even when we think we are alone, life often has a quiet way of showing us we are not.